stronger than that. Trouble comes screaming, we always holler back. Don't let it get us down.
Hello and welcome to another episode of We the People, put on by Fort Wayne 912. I'm Bill Wilcutts, and we're going to be talking more and continuing our series on Common Core. I have here with me Joy Pullman of the Heartland Institute. Thanks for joining us, Joy.
Thank you.
Joy is a research fellow of education with the Heartland Institute and also the managing editor of School Reform News. Our purpose here on our program this evening is going to be to continue dispelling some of the claims by supporters of Common Core. We're going to be continuing our coverage on the August 5th hearing that took place down in the Indiana State House with the Common Core Study Committee hearing, and we want to emphasize with our viewers that this hearing did not cover a couple of different aspects of Common Core, namely cost, curriculum that will come from the new standards, testing, and controversial data collection aspect of Common Core. As always, we don't expect you to take our word for this, even though we're trying to show you our best documentation and video clips of people in their own words, but we always encourage you to do your own research. You can also view this testimony on the government website on the indiain.gov. The website will be shown on the screen periodically throughout the program, and we'll just get right to it then with Joy. There's been a lot of testimony given in support of Common Core that claims that the results in our public education system here in Indiana is poor, and that by adopting the Common Core standards, it'll solve our problems. Mm-hmm. Now, given that the standards themselves are really one part of education, how is adopting new standards, let alone the Common Core standards, going to help?
Well, as far as the research tells us, it's not.
Okay.
This is one of the big conceptual leaps that people make about public education. So I do actually agree with people based on the research, the years of test scores, and the fact that the research showing that test scores are generally pretty valid and accurate and so forth. And just a lot of other anecdotal and information and data and stories about the decline of American education. So I agree with all of that, but I don't agree based on the research that adopting common national education goals are going to do anything to benefit kids from that. And so one of my favorite studies that I like to cite on this topic is one that was done in 2012 by the Brookings Institution. It's a left-leaning, well-respected think tank, another one of those think tanks. Mm-hmm. And so what they did was statistically analyze, they compared states' academic standards with student achievement. So they wanted to see whether there's a correlation, a link. If a state sets really high expectations for kids, do the kids measure up to those? Does that create some? Does that benefit kids? Does that create extra learning? And the results of their study showed that no, there's no link between the two. Some states have really high standards and really low student achievement. Other states have really low standards and really high student achievement. So there are a couple of states that have had high standards and really reinforced those through a lot of other mechanisms. But the overall pattern, of education research shows us that standards are not an answer to problems. So we have all these people telling us standards are going to solve the problem, but they fail to do what they keep telling us Common Core wants kids to do, which is show me the evidence.
Right. So what other areas should Indiana be focusing on? Because as we covered in our previous episode, part 3 of the Common Core series, we talked about and demonstrated, and we'll get into that more here with some of the other testimony. But Indiana's standards in English and math are really quite good. Mm-hmm. So where is Indiana lacking? Where are we dropping the ball?
Well, that is a question that I probably
a big question,
it's
right?
A very big question.
Big answer,
and
small question,
I
big
feel
answer.
bad trying to criticize people that I know are working very hard to do their best they can for kids. I don't doubt that about teachers, about administrators, and so forth. But there are a number of things that we know are bad about education that research has shown, and common sense. I don't like to only talk about research because, you need to kind of have a consensus of research, and usually it confirms what people who have been paying attention for a long time already knew.
Right.
So, but I think it is helpful. It does tell us some things that we can consider are really helpful and accurate. Anyway, so research and experience shows us that, for example, one of the things that is really low about America's education system is our teacher quality and recruitment. And this is really touchy because, again, teachers work very hard and they love kids and they do a very good job. But the sort of training that they're put into really handicaps them. So America's education schools, the thing that every teacher has to go through in order to get into a school that trains them how to be a teacher, doesn't actually teach them things that help them be a good teacher, believe it or not. So research has for about the past 15 years actually shown that teacher certification doesn't mark a good teacher. So a teacher who's certified is no better on average than a teacher who's not. And not only that, we've known for a really long time that education schools, and I have lots of friends who are teachers, I've talked to them, and they'll tell me that they hated their teacher education because once they got in the classroom, they have discovered that they had learned very little that was useful to them in interacting with kids. So, we could spend programs talking about this, but
Sure.
One of the main things that teachers are deprived of is content knowledge. So elementary school teachers, for example, they are not asked usually to take any math course at all. But the math that they teach kids is the foundation for, of course, all the rest of the math that they do.
Sure.
And so most of the time, if you ask an elementary school teacher, to explain, concepts about numbers and something, he or she will have very little idea, simply because it hasn't been a requirement and he or she hasn't been taught very well. And that obviously has repercussions.
Right. Yeah, and I recall a testimony given by Dr. Milgram, who we showed some video from in the last episode, where he states that the teachers, the elementary teachers are inadequately trained to teach math. And in other countries, some countries, a teacher is there's two teachers for an elementary class. One is more in the humanities, and the other one is more in the sciences and mathematics.
My sister-in-law does that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there you go. Well, I'd like to get into some of the testimony that we saw on October 5th down at the State House. Now, some of the proponents of Common Core, they claim that the standards can be changed. So, with the premise that, let's say the Common Core, well, it's not so bad after all. Maybe there's some good ideas that we could pull from it, so we'll just do that and cherry pick. However, I'd like to play a clip here from Bill Evers, who is a research fellow at the Hoover Institute of Stanford University. Let's hear his clip, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I think the superintendent's suggestion that she's going to go in and look at each standard and propose revisions and changes that will not be comported with the Common Core. When Mr. Zimba and Ms. Porter-McGee stood up here and they were questioned by your colleague, you noticed that they only said, yes, you can make additions. They did not acknowledge the superintendent's idea of revising and rewriting and changing the Common Core. If you do that, because these standards, these Common Core standards are copyright, and you have to take the whole thing verbatim or not at all, you can't do it. You'll have to rewrite everything once you rewrite anything.
Okay, so go ahead and share your thoughts on what he just said.
Well, you hear kind of things different from people who support Common Core or want people to accept it. You hear something different from them than you see in the actual documents that require states to do Common Core from the federal government. So this is one of those things. So you'll hear people who are proponents say, look, you can mix and match, you can add and so forth. But when the federal government gave states waivers of the federal No Child Left Behind law, and when it invited states to get federal money in exchange for doing a bunch of things, in both cases it said, you basically have to do Common Core in order to get preference, in order to get these things that you want. And so included in those documents, those contracts, those agreements between states and the federal government was the federal requirement that states can't take anything out of Common Core. They can't mix and match. The flexibility that is allowed by those agreements is the ability to add up to 15% on top of the Common Core standards.
Now, he mentioned copyright. Now, how does that apply?
Well, it's hard to say without a legal opinion, but it is a fact that two nonprofit, non-governmental organizations, the ones that created Common Core using private foundation money, they also did that behind closed doors, and not subject to open records or public meeting laws.
Right.
But those organizations state on their website, right on the Common Core standards themselves, that they hold the copyright to Common Core. So they are the ones who legally have control over it. And so when you have a copyright in place, that also, you have to use it the way that the copyright owner says that you can use it. That's how copyright law works. So no one has really tested the copyright law, but the fact is that it exists, and given how copyright works in other instances, that implies, things about that they're the ones who control how people use the standards.
Right, just as in a novel or a film or
Yes.
something of that nature. Okay. So let's move along here. Now we have Jim Sturgis. He is executive director of the Pioneer Institute. Now he denounces the claim that this is a state-led effort, which if our viewers start looking, listening, what they'll find this state-led effort phrase being touted.
Yes.
So let's hear what he has to say about that.
First myth, these Common Core standards have been called state-led. Let me compare very briefly the difference between a truly state-led effort and a more national effort under the auspices of not-for-profits in the D.C. area. In Massachusetts, public consideration of our state standards in the late 1990s and early 2000s included drafts developed after extensive parent, teacher, scholarly, and business input, extensive public comment periods, public hearings, extensive revisions, which are again put out for public comment. The development of the standards was front-page news in Massachusetts for years. The result of that is parents and teachers were able to get an opportunity to follow, to understand the controversy, and frankly to feel ultimately a sense of ownership. That is not possible with Common Core because they were developed very much behind closed doors. When you send a few state education bureaucrats to offices in D.C. to participate, that's not state-led. That does not engage parents and teachers, does not engage local scholars. There were few comments given back on the basis of public comments submitted on Common Core. Public hearings, I guess I'd ask if there were really any public hearings. I don't recall any. If this is the idea of state-led process, I've got to say the people who have been involved in this have placed no real value in the public's input.
So, Joy, through all your research, interviews, writing on all of this about Common Core, can you either validate or invalidate his comments?
Well, I've spoken to people who were on the committees to create Common Core, and they basically confirm what Mr. Sturgis has said. To call the process state-led is less accurate than calling it special interest-led. And again, special interests are welcome to do whatever they want, but they are not welcome to pretend that they have, some sort of legal or I don't know, proper justification from people in America who are given the right to self-government when we weren't given the ability to participate, as he says, in the process of remaking our education system. So the last thing that I'll say before we get going on this topic is that if you look at the report that the Indiana Department of Education just put out on Common Core a few months ago, it states that in Indiana, when the state switched our own standards for Common Core's demands for what students will learn, there was no public comment, there was no public hearing, there was nothing. It was just our State Board of Education at one meeting saying, yes, we'll do this. So they didn't, say, citizens of Indiana, we'd like your comment on this big thing that we're about to do. So
So it wasn't front page news like he like he describes in Massachusetts.
And Mr. Sturgis is speaking from Massachusetts, so it was the same process or lack of process in Indiana.
Okay. All right. Now we have another clip from Mr. Sturgis where he debunks the claim that material can be added to the Common Core, which it can, but he kind of puts it into a practical perspective as to whether it will be or it will not. So let's hear what he has to say.
Assurances from Common Core proponents that each state can add whatever it wants to national standards is truly meaningless. Common Core requires that states adopt the standards verbatim, limiting state flexibility to 15% of the core. However, given that national assessments will not cover state supplements, no districts and no teachers will end up using the add-ons if you go with a national test.
So notice here that he didn't say that it's false. He said it's meaningless. So it is true, I'm assuming. What can you say about that with your research and your perspective?
Well, that doesn't contradict what I said earlier about the federal requirements that you can only add and not take away from Common Core, and then only add up to 15%. His point is that if you even do add that 15%, the teachers will have less of a reason to teach that extra thing, anything that you add, because those won't be on any national Common Core tests that states are joining in conjunction with Common Core.
Okay, so teaching the additional material from a teacher's perspective may not necessarily be useless, but they're not going to be motivated to do it.
Well, classroom time is precious, so if you don't have to do something, why would you?
Right. So, okay. All right, now we're going to move along here to Professor Terrence Moore of Hillsdale College. He's a history professor there, and he brings up something that is kind of disturbing. And I think it suggests that there may be something nefarious, some nefarious motives behind Common Core. Let's listen to his comment and then discuss
That's
that.
a good
Yeah,
word.
yeah, I bought that one. So
the final thing that I would say is just simply the thing that maybe bothers me more than anything else is found on page number 1 of the introduction, and that says that the Common Core is a living work. That means that the thing that you vote on today could be something different tomorrow, and 5 years from now, it is completely unrecognizable. Thanks.
Okay, so he calls it a living document. Those of us who follow the Constitution, we hear that phrase sometimes. What does this say to you?
Well, I think he outlined the impact very well. So if you say, yes, we want to do Common Core, what Common Core means now could be different in 5 years. And so that, I mean, the people who created Common Core have said what is written in their own document. They expect to make revisions, they expect to make changes. And the problem with that is, of course, states, we change our laws all the time. But when the way that we do that allows for representation from the people like us. We get to vote on the people who are changing those laws. We can go to those meetings. We can listen to what is happening. That wasn't true with Common Core, and that doesn't have to be true in their further deliberations. So what this basically means is takes people, Americans who are given the legal and the historical right, and tradition of being able to govern ourselves and have a say in the policies that, impact our lives. That takes our voice away from us, our ability to say, yes, I assent to the kind of government that is governing me.
Right. So, I mean, essentially here, as far as education goes, there is a substantial loss of freedom and influence by the average person.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, I guess, how else should we be concerned about this other than just the freedoms? Is there anything else that jumps out at you that
about
raises
all of
a
the
red
entire
flag?
Common Core enterprise?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Well, if we're just going to talk about the standards themselves, I could talk about the right to self-government all day because it is a really important thing. I mean, even for people who debate about what it means in America, we all agree that we should have a say in the policies that govern us. So for organizations that are nonprofits to pretend that we have representation, if our State Department of Education sends an unelected bureaucrat, one of 135, to go make decisions about what kids are going to learn in our schools, that's not representation,
Right,
by anyone's
right.
definition of the word.
No, not at all. Okay, now I'd like to move along here. We have we have some comments from Dr. Sandra Stotsky of the University of Arkansas. Here again, her credentials are absolutely impressive and too long to go over. But if I had to sum it up, I'd say if she's not the top expert in the nation, she has to be one of them.
Yes.
Now, one other thing that I'd like to add about Dr. Stotsky is that after Indiana's latest revision of state standards, she was brought in to review them and kind of give a seal of approval. And my understanding is that she thought very highly of what Indiana had put out.
And that means a lot because she was the main writer for the best English language arts standards in the country, and she is well known. She has a doctorate in English language arts. She is well known for her contributions to the scholarly field, for her research and for her analysis of research and so forth. So, like you say, her opinion is not just some random person off the street.
Right. And I would strongly suggest to our viewers that they watch this testimony. You can see it on indiana.gov. or in.gov. We will be posting the website. You should see it on the program here. But her testimony was really quite brilliant, and I would highly recommend people watch it. It is rather lengthy. She was up there for a very long time, and she got a lot of good questions and gave some fantastic answers. But let's listen to her comments here. She's discussing legislation which was passed in Massachusetts, which she called landmark legislation. It was bipartisan, and it really dealt with the real problems that Massachusetts was facing in their public education. And note her final comment about Common Core. So let's go ahead and watch Dr. Stotsky.
About a bipartisan effort, because this is not about a Republican education or a Democratic education. It's about the academic education of all kids. And all the pieces have to be in place. And they all have to be looked at, and that's what they did in this legislation. They just didn't look at any one area of education. They looked across the entire spectrum. Teachers, colleges weren't happy with them. The unions weren't happy with them. I mean, nobody was happy with them, but they didn't care. They just had to do something with every single area to upgrade public education. That's why Common Core is to me, an unfortunate distraction, because it's focused a lot of political energy on something that's, if anything, going to damage. It's not going to help because it doesn't address all the real problems. But that's my 2 cents worth.
Okay, so she basically says what we were talking about earlier, which was, taking on standards is not really going to solve education problems that many states are experiencing, particularly Indiana, since our standards are of a high level. So is she right or wrong? Is she right on here?
Well, I actually agree, and I have recently written about this. If you remember back to Econ 101, there's this thing called opportunity cost. So the concept is that you can't do everything, right? So you have to pick and choose what are the best things to do. So if you're doing something that is a waste of your time, then it's not just the fact that you wasted this time, but that you could have also been doing other things with that time that are productive, beneficial, and helpful. So Dr. Stotsky is making the point that Indiana and all states that go with Common Core have an opportunity cost. While we're busy doing something that the research shows was not going to benefit children, and actually for our state is an academic step backward, then there are all these other problems that we do have that are not being addressed. We're spending time, money, energy, teachers, thousands of children, 800,000 kids in this state going to public schools. And so all of those energies are being consumed on an absolute a treadmill, a hamster wheel. And so that is a real tragedy when, again, the people's energies and taxpayers' dollars and our kids, we don't get second grade back. We don't get, the money in our taxes back. And so the fact that all of that is being blown on something that has very poor or is lacking in research as a problem.
Okay. Now, one of the things that a lot of, and as you recall, when I was at the hearing, I did hear a lot of the politicians, the representatives and senators, they did ask a lot of questions about, we have great standards, but why aren't our kids making the grade?
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty obvious, and it's good to hear that, but unfortunately, that's not what this hearing was about. And they really wanted to know, it sounded like we needed to have another hearing on curriculum and maybe application and so forth and testing. But there's we've seen a lot of good testimony here, and we've seen some that sounds good on the surface. From different experts and organizations around the country. Some people, who are deemed top in their field, and it causes us to really dig deeper because they look so good on the surface: the who, what, how, and why, what the motivations are. The two key witnesses that were opponents of Common Core were, Dr. Milgram and Dr. Stotsky. In English and Dr. Stotsky in English and Language Arts. Both their credentials are very impressive, and the thing that I noticed was that, or thought to myself, was that their testimonies might be discredited simply by being able to say, well, they're the lone voice, because you had Jason Zimba, who had a huge list of mathematicians and math organizations who supported and signed off on a letter of Common Core that they received, and so forth. But I really think, and you kind of reflect what I'm saying here for me. I think we should really listen to their testimony very, very intently, because the proponents and the developers of Common Core, those groups pushing Common Core and supporting it, asked them to be on the validation committee for Common Core.
And then they were the only two content experts in math and English language arts, so they have a unique position to be able to speak on the topic.
Exactly, and the thing that really that I think really gives credit to their testimony is that fact that the proponents, the developers of Common Core, said, okay, well, we need somebody who really knows what they're talking about to put a seal of approval on here. And they saw fit that they only needed these two people, one person in each area. And if it were me, I would kind of say, well, what if I get one individual who just is going to poo-poo the idea no matter what? I would like to have probably three people so that if I do get a dissenter, then I can say, well,
I would have gone for more than
exactly. Okay, so more than three. Okay, let's say three at a minimum. But yeah, you'd gone with more. So I think that really gives credit to them because the proponents of Common Core have given the credit to their testimony. Is that something you would agree with? And could you elaborate on that?
And I was in Tennessee last week testifying on Common Core before the state legislature. And one of the things that I said was, Dr. Milgram and Dr. Skotsky are the most widely quoted people on this topic. And I think rightly so, like I said, because of their unique position to speak to it. But I could sit here and quote professors and academics and high school teachers and, people who have experience with academics, with schools, with what kids should be learning and when. I could sit there for an hour and recite, quotes of what they have said about Common Core and saying, hey, this is a problem, this isn't something that we support. So there are a wide variety of people who have a lot of education experience who say this is extremely debatable. And one of the problems that we talked about earlier with people losing their voice and having the standards be kind of shuffled in through a back door is that we didn't have that debate before Common Core happened, and it should have happened. If you have an open debate, you bring out all these little topics because people are able to present their best evidence and compare and contrast it. And then hopefully you get a better product in the end because you shore up the weak spots because they've been exposed. But because those weak spots didn't have a chance to be exposed when Common Core is being created, now they're just being inflicted on kids wholesale.
Okay, great. Well, that's excellent. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much, Joy, for being with us again. And you can follow Joy as she writes on and researches this topic of Common Core at the Heartland Institute. Heartland.org is the website. I would also suggest again that our viewers go to the Fort Wayne website, Fort Wayne 912 website, fortwayne912.com. Watch our other episodes on Common Core. We have 3 parts. This is the 4th. And watch those and really bring yourself up to speed on this issue. The Fort Wayne 912 also meets the 3rd Tuesday of every month at the Classic Cafe at 4832 Hillegas Road, 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. And we also have Common Core presentations that we're doing around the city, and you can go to our calendar on the website and find out when and where those will be. So I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Bill Wolcutz with the Fort Wayne 912, and we hope to see you again soon.
That wasn't bad. It must be hard to...
Hunkered in the sand, middle of nowhere. The war was raging and he didn't think he'd be spared. He told his buddy, guess this is the end. His buddy looked at him, said, don't say that again, 'cause